She called me a broke grandma, and the room laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I was a punchline they had all agreed on before I even walked through the door. I didn't say anything. I just adjusted the strap of my purse on my shoulder and stepped fully into the dining room, letting the chandelier light settle over me like it had 1,000 times before in this house that used to feel like mine. The table was already set, polished silverware lined up perfectly, wine glasses catching the warm glow, everything arranged with the kind of care that suggests celebration, but no one stood to greet me, no one even paused long enough to pretend. Ashley sat at the far end, one leg crossed over the other, her smile still lingering from her comment, while my son Daniel stood beside her with a glass of red wine, staring down at it as if the surface might give him instructions on what kind of man he was supposed to be tonight. I felt the familiar weight of silence settle around me, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against your chest and reminds you exactly where you stand. I took my seat without being invited. The chair felt colder than I remembered. "Dinner's almost ready," Ashley said lightly, not looking at me, as if her earlier words were nothing more than a passing breeze. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a continuation, smooth and effortless, like she hadn't just reduced me to something small in front of a room full of people. I nodded once, more out of habit than agreement, and folded my hands neatly in my lap. I had learned a long time ago that reacting in moments like this only gave people something else to use against you. Around me, conversations resumed in low, comfortable tones, the kind reserved for people who feel secure in their place at the table. I listened without listening, catching fragments here and there, vacation plans, business deals, renovations, all the things that required money, all the things that quietly reinforced the story they had decided to tell about me. That I had none. That I was past my usefulness. That I was, as Ashley had so delicately put it, broke. I glanced at Daniel. He still hadn't looked at me. His shoulders were slightly tense, but not enough to suggest conflict. Just enough to suggest awareness. He had hurt her. Of course he had. Everyone had. And yet, nothing. I reached for the water glass in front of me and took a slow sip, letting the coolness steady my hands. Across the table, Ashley leaned toward one of the guests, her voice dipping into that soft, conspiratorial tone she used when she wanted to appear charming. "You know how it is," she said with a small laugh, just loud enough for me to hear. "Some people just never plan for the future." Another ripple of polite laughter followed, quieter this time, more contained but no less sharp. I set the glass down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the placemat. Small details. Control what you can. The rest of the room faded slightly as I let my gaze drift over the familiar walls, the framed photos, the carefully curated image of a family that had once felt unbreakable. Birthdays, holidays, milestones. Every picture told a story of unity, of love, of something solid. But tonight, those images felt like props in a play I was no longer part of. I sat there, listening, observing, letting each word, each glance, each omission settle into place like pieces of a puzzle I had been assembling for years without realizing it. This wasn't new. Not really. It was just clearer now. Sharper. Stripped of any illusion I had been holding onto out of habit or hope. Somewhere in the house, I heard the faint sound of a door opening, then closing. Footsteps followed, measured and unhurried, moving closer to the dining room. No one else seemed to notice. Or if they did, they didn't care. Ashley was still talking, her tone bright, her posture relaxed, completely certain of the ground beneath her feet. I kept my eyes on the table for a moment longer, then lifted them slowly, just as the footsteps reached the doorway. And still I said nothing. The footsteps paused just beyond the doorway, and for a brief moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath without realizing it, as if something unseen had shifted the air itself. I noticed it in the way the laughter softened, in the way Ashley's voice hesitated. For half a second before continuing, just enough to reveal that even she could feel when something was not entirely under her control. I kept my posture steady, my hands still folded neatly in my lap, but my attention sharpened. I did not turn immediately. There was no need to rush. I had spent years learning that timing mattered more than reaction. "Oh, you made it," Ashley said suddenly, her tone lifting with a kind of polished surprise, the kind she used when she wanted to appear gracious in front of others. Chairs shifted lightly as a few heads turned toward the entrance. I followed a moment later, slow and deliberate, allowing my gaze to settle on the man now standing just inside the dining room. He wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored, his presence calm but unmistakably purposeful. His eyes moved across the room once, taking in the scene before resting briefly on me. There was a small nod. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated. Just enough. I recognized him immediately, though I gave no sign. Around the table, confusion flickered in quiet expressions. This was not someone they had been expecting. Ashley straightened in her seat, her smile tightening just slightly at the edges. "I do not believe we were expecting anyone else," she said, her voice still light, but with a new layer beneath it, something cautious, something calculating. The man stepped forward with measured ease. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, his tone even professional, carrying just enough authority to quiet the room without raising his voice. "My name is Harrison Cole. I was asked to be here this evening." A brief silence followed. I could feel it ripple across the table, subtle but unmistakable. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes moving between Ashley and the man, uncertainty beginning to take shape in his expression. "Asked by who?" Ashley replied quickly, her fingers tightening slightly around the stem of her glass, though her smile remained in place. Mr. Cole did not answer right away. Instead, he reached into the slim leather folder he carried, opening it with a calm precision that seemed to draw the room further into stillness. Paper shifted softly. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. But somehow it carried more weight than any raised voice could have. I watched without moving, my breathing slow and even my gaze steady. For years I had been the one sitting quietly while others decided what mattered, who mattered, what was worth acknowledging and what could be dismissed. Tonight felt different, though nothing outwardly had changed yet. It was a subtle shift, like the moment before a storm when the air grows heavier. Not with chaos but with certainty. "I was asked to attend by Mrs. Margaret Whitmore," he said finally, his eyes lifting again, this time resting fully on me. There it was. My name spoken clearly, without hesitation, without apology. It settled into the room in a way that none of Ashley's words had. I could feel the change immediately, small but undeniable. A few heads turned back toward me, curiosity replacing indifference. Ashley's smile faltered, just for a second, before she recovered. "Margaret," she said, a soft laugh slipping into her voice, though it did not quite reach her eyes. "I think there must be some misunderstanding." I tilted my head slightly, meeting her gaze for the first time that evening. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just clarity. "No," I said quietly, my voice steady, controlled, carrying across the table without effort. "There is no misunderstanding." The room grew still again, but this time it felt different. Not dismissive. Not careless. Attentive. Waiting. I rose from my chair slowly, smoothing the fabric of my coat as I stood. The movement was simple, deliberate, practiced. No rush. No hesitation. Just presence. Daniel's eyes followed me now, confusion deepening into something else, something closer to unease. Ashley said nothing this time. Mr. Cole closed the folder halfway, holding it with both hands as if what it contained was not just paper, but something far more significant. I took a single step forward, then another, positioning myself where the light from the chandelier fell more directly across me. For the first time that night, I did not feel like a guest in that room. I felt like something they had not prepared for, something they had underestimated. And still I kept my expression calm, my tone measured, my movements unhurried. Because the truth did not need to be forced into the room. It only needed to be given the space to be heard. Mr. Cole opened the folder fully this time, the soft sound of paper unfolding echoing louder than it should have in a room that had gone completely still, and I could see it in their faces now, the shift from mild curiosity to something sharper, something unsettled, because control had quietly moved without their permission. "As requested," he said, his voice measured and precise, "I am here to formally present documentation regarding a private trust established under the Whitmore family estate." The words settled heavily, not because they were dramatic, but because they were exact, leaving no space for interpretation. Ashley's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, her fingers loosening from her glass before tightening again as if she had to remind herself to remain composed. "A trust?" she repeated lightly, though her voice carried a thin edge now. stretched just enough to reveal the strain beneath. I think we would have known if something like that existed. Mr. Cole did not respond to her directly. Instead, he turned a single page, his attention focused, unhurried, as if the pace itself was part of the message. The Whitmore Trust was established 11 years ago, he continued, and amended 3 times under the direction of Mrs. Margaret Whitmore. Again, my name spoken clearly, anchored in something official, something undeniable. Daniel shifted in his seat, the chair legs scraping faintly against the hardwood floor. Mom, he said, finally looking at me fully, his expression caught between confusion and disbelief. What is he talking about? I met his gaze, steady and calm, and for a brief moment, I saw something familiar flicker there. Not the man he had become, but the boy he used to be, searching for reassurance. I did not offer it. He is talking about responsibility, I said quietly, my voice even, carrying just enough to hold the room without forcing it. Mr. Cole inclined his head slightly, then continued. The trust was designed to secure long-term financial stability for designated beneficiaries, with specific provisions tied to conduct, involvement, and demonstrated respect toward the grantor. A pause followed, not because he needed one, but because the meaning needed time to land. Around the table, the silence deepened, no longer passive, no longer dismissive, but attentive in a way that made every small movement feel amplified. Ashley let out a soft laugh, too quick, too bright. Well, that sounds very formal, she said, waving a hand lightly as if brushing away the weight of his words. But I still do not see what this has to do with tonight. Mr. Cole turned another page. The total value of the trust currently stands at $8.4 million, he said, his tone unchanged, steady as ever. The number did not echo, but it might as well have. I felt it ripple through the room, through the quiet calculations behind their eyes, through the sudden stillness that replaced every trace of casual conversation. Daniel's breath caught, barely audible, while Ashley's smile finally faltered in a way she could not fully hide. $8.4 million. Not exaggerated. Not embellished. Just fact. I remained where I stood, my posture unchanged, my expression calm, as if the number belonged to someone else entirely. Because in a way it did. It belonged to the version of me they had never bothered to understand. That is not possible, Ashley said, her voice lower now, more controlled but no longer light. We would have known. Mr. Cole looked up from the document, his gaze steady. The trust was intentionally structured to remain private, unless specific conditions were met. Another pause. Another moment for the meaning to settle. Those conditions, he added, have now been met. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the faint hum of the house seemed to recede, as if the walls themselves were listening. I could feel their attention shift fully now, not just toward the document, but toward me, toward the quiet center they had overlooked for so long. Ashley's fingers tightened again around her glass, though she did not lift it. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching my face for something, anything that might explain what he was hearing. Mom, he said again, softer this time, why did you not tell me? I held his gaze for a moment, letting the question linger between us, not rushing to answer, not softening the space it created. Because, I said finally, my voice calm, almost gentle, you never asked the right questions. The words did not land like an accusation. They did not need to. They simply existed, clear and unadorned, filling the silence with a truth that could not be reshaped or dismissed. Mr. Cole closed the folder halfway again, his presence steady, waiting, as if he understood that what mattered now was not just what was written on the pages, but what had already been revealed without them. No one reached for their glass after that, not even out of habit, and the stillness that followed was no longer polite or uncertain but heavy, deliberate, as if every person in that room had suddenly realized they were part of something they did not fully understand. I could see it most clearly in Ashley, in the way her posture remained upright but no longer relaxed, in the way her smile had disappeared entirely now, replaced by something sharper, something that tried to hold its shape but could not quite hide the calculation behind it. What conditions? She asked, her voice steady but lower than before, as if she had decided that control could be regained through precision. Mr. Cole did not rush to answer. He placed the folder gently on the edge of the table, aligning it with care, the same way I had aligned my glass earlier, And then he opened it again, turning to a page that had already been marked. The trust includes a behavioral clause, he said, his tone unchanged, which outlines that continued access to financial benefits is contingent upon maintaining a standard of respect, inclusion, and good faith toward Mrs. Whitmore. The words were simple, but they carried weight in a way that could not be softened. I watched as they settled into the room, as each person measured them against what had just taken place, against what had been said, against what had been allowed to pass without interruption. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression tightening, not in anger but in recognition, as if he had just connected something he had chosen not to see before. Ashley let out a slow breath, her eyes flicking briefly toward him before returning to Mr. Cole. That sounds subjective, she said carefully, each word placed with intention. Respect can mean different things to different people. Mr. Cole gave a small nod, acknowledging the statement without conceding to it. Which is why the clause includes specific examples, he replied, his hand resting lightly on the page. Public humiliation, verbal diminishment, or deliberate exclusion are all considered violations under the terms of the agreement. The room did not react immediately. It did not need to. The meaning was clear, unmistakable, and far too recent to ignore. I remained still, my gaze steady, not searching for reactions, not waiting for apologies, simply allowing the truth to occupy the space it had been denied for so long. Ashley's fingers curled slightly against the table, the movement small but telling. I think this is being taken out of context, she said, her voice lifting just enough to try to reclaim some of its earlier lightness, though it no longer rang true. We were joking. Everyone here knows that. No one spoke. No one confirmed it. The silence that followed her words was different from before. It was not passive. It was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that reveals more than any agreement ever could. Daniel looked down at the table, his jaw tightening, his hand moving to the back of his neck in a gesture I had seen countless times when he was younger, when he knew he had done something wrong but did not yet know how to say it. Mom, he said quietly, not looking up. I did not think. He stopped, the sentence unfinished, the thought incomplete. I did not help him finish it. Some realizations need to stand on their own. Mr. Cole turned another page, his movements as precise as ever. There is also an enforcement provision, he continued, which allows the grantor to suspend or permanently revoke access to the trust for any individual found to be in violation of these terms. Another pause. Another moment for the wait to settle. That decision, he added, rests solely with Mrs. Whitmore. This time the silence shifted again, not just heavy but focused, narrowing until it pointed directly at me. I could feel it without turning my head, without changing my expression. Their attention was no longer scattered across the room. It was centered, anchored, waiting. Ashley's composure wavered just slightly before she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms in a gesture that was meant to signal control but instead revealed tension. So what exactly are you saying? She asked, her tone no longer light, no longer dismissive, but edged with something closer to urgency. Mr. Cole did not answer immediately. Instead, he closed the folder once more, this time fully, and stepped back just half a pace, creating a small but deliberate space between himself and the table. It was not his place to say it. That much was clear. The room remained still, every eye now fixed in the same direction, every breath held just a fraction longer than usual. I let the moment stretch, not out of hesitation but out of intention, because for the first time in a very long time, I understood exactly what it meant to choose when to speak and when to remain silent. And when I finally moved, it was not sudden, not dramatic, just a quiet shift of weight. A small step forward into a space that had always been mine, even when I had allowed others to believe otherwise. I did not raise my voice when I spoke, and that alone was enough to hold their attention in a way that no accusation ever could, because calm does something to people that noise never will. It forces them to listen to what they would rather avoid. What I am saying, I began, my tone steady and even, is that respect is not complicated, and it is not subjective when it is missing. I let the words settle before continuing, not rushing, not filling the silence for their comfort. Across from me, Ashley shifted slightly in her chair, her arms still crossed but no longer as firmly, as if the posture itself had begun to lose its meaning. Daniel remained still, his eyes fixed somewhere between the table and my face, caught in that space where realization starts to take shape but has not yet found the courage to fully surface. For years, I continued, I have sat at tables like this one, in rooms like this, listening to conversations where I was present but not included, spoken about but not spoken to, reduced to something smaller each time it was convenient. I did not look at Ashley when I said it. I did not need to. The truth does not require direction when everyone in the room already knows where it belongs. I told myself it was temporary, I added, my voice quiet but clear. That families go through phases, that people get busy, that respect looks different over time. I paused, allowing the weight of those justifications to linger, not as excuses, but as evidence of how long I had allowed things to continue. But respect does not disappear by accident, I said, my gaze steady now, moving slowly across the table, meeting each pair of eyes without hesitation. It is removed, piece by piece, choice by choice. No one interrupted. No one attempted to correct me. The room had shifted too far for that. Ashley uncrossed her arms then, placing her hands flat on the table as if grounding herself, her fingers spreading slightly against the polished surface. Margaret, she said, her voice softer now, more controlled, as if she had decided that a different tone might restore something she felt slipping away. I think this is being blown out of proportion. We all say things sometimes. It does not mean. I raised my hand gently, not abruptly, just enough to signal that I would finish before she did. She stopped. Not because she agreed, but because something in the moment made interruption feel inappropriate. It means exactly what it shows, I said, still calm, still measured. And tonight it was shown very clearly. I turned slightly toward Mr. Cole, acknowledging his presence without needing his words. You explained the terms, I said. You explained the conditions. He gave a small nod, nothing more. That was all that was required. I shifted my attention back to the table, to the faces that now watched me not with dismissal, but with a kind of quiet anticipation that had not been there before. The trust was never about money, I continued. It was about responsibility, about ensuring that what was built over a lifetime was placed in the hands of people who understood its value, not just in dollars, but in how it was earned and how it should be treated. Daniel looked up at that, his expression tightening, as if the words had reached something deeper than he expected. Mom, he said again, this time with more urgency. I did not know. I would never have let. I held his gaze, not unkindly, but without softening the truth. You did let it, I said quietly. Not by what you said, but by what you allowed. The words were not sharp, but they landed with a clarity that left no room for reinterpretation. He looked away then, the weight of it settling in a way that no argument could have changed. Ashley's composure slipped further, though she tried to hold it together, her posture straight, her chin lifted just slightly higher than before. So what happens now? She asked, her voice no longer carrying its earlier confidence, but something closer to controlled concern. It was the first time that night she had asked a question without an edge of dismissal. I let the question sit for a moment, not because I needed time to answer, but because I understood that the answer itself was not just information, it was a decision, one that had been forming long before this evening. Now, I said finally, my tone unchanged, we acknowledge what has already happened. I took a slow breath, steady and deliberate, feeling the room hold still around me once more, waiting, watching, understanding that whatever came next would not be undone by explanation or softened by intention, because some lines once seen cannot be unseen and some truths once spoken do not return to silence. No one spoke after that, not immediately, and the silence that followed was no longer uncertain but settled, like something final had already taken shape beneath the surface and was simply waiting to be acknowledged. I could see it in the way Ashley's eyes shifted, not toward me, but toward the folder resting in front of Mr. Cole, as if the paper itself held the answer she was searching for, something she could still negotiate, still reinterpret. Daniel remained still, his shoulders slightly lowered now, the tension no longer hidden but no longer resisted either. It was a quiet kind of surrender, the kind that comes when denial runs out of space. I let the moment breathe, not rushing to fill it, because for the first time in a long time, I was not the one trying to keep the peace. There are two ways this can go, I said finally, my voice calm, measured, carrying across the table without effort. One is simple. The other is honest. Ashley let out a small breath, almost a laugh, though it did not carry any real humor. Those sound like the same thing, she replied, but there was no confidence in it now, only habit. I shook my head slightly. They are not, I said. Simple avoids responsibility. Honest requires it. I saw the words land not as an attack but as something heavier, something that asked for more than a quick response. Mr. Cole remained silent beside me, his presence steady, allowing the space to remain mine. The simple path, I continued, is to pretend tonight did not happen, to call it a misunderstanding, to say things were taken out of context, to move forward exactly as before, with the same conversations, the same patterns, the same quiet decisions about who matters and who does not. I paused, letting the familiarity of that version settle because they all recognized it. They had lived in it. The honest path, I said, my tone unchanged, is to acknowledge that respect was not given, that it was withheld, and that it was done intentionally, whether it was admitted or not. Ashley shifted again, her fingers tapping lightly against the table now, a small restless movement she did not seem aware of. You are making this sound like some kind of judgment, she said, her voice lower, more controlled but no longer dismissive. I met her gaze, steady and unhurried. It is not a judgment, I replied. It is a recognition. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, his hands clasped together as if holding onto something that was slipping. What does that mean for the trust? He asked quietly, his voice careful, almost cautious, as if the answer might confirm something he was not ready to face. I let a brief silence pass before answering, not to create tension, but to make sure the words were heard fully when they came. It means, I said, that the terms are not theoretical. They exist for a reason. Mr. Cole stepped forward just slightly then, opening the folder once more, his movements smooth, deliberate. Under Clause 7, he said, his tone clear and precise, the grantor has the authority to immediately suspend distributions to any individual determined to be in violation of the behavioral conditions outlined in the trust. He did not look at Ashley or Daniel when he spoke. He did not need to. The words carried their own direction. Ashley's posture tightened again, the composure she had been trying to maintain slipping just enough to reveal the urgency beneath it. Suspend, she repeated, her voice sharper now, though still controlled. That is temporary, right? Mr. Cole closed the folder once more, his gaze steady. That depends entirely on the decision of Mrs. Whitmore. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was different. Not just heavy, not just attentive, but focused in a way that made every second feel deliberate. I could feel their attention settle on me fully now, not as an afterthought, not as a presence to be tolerated, but as the center of a decision they could not make for themselves. I did not rush. I did not react to the tension. I simply stood there, feeling the weight of the moment without resisting it, because it was not something to avoid. It was something that had been built, slowly over time, through every word that had been said and every silence that had followed. You asked what happens now, I said, my voice steady, almost gentle. Now I decide what continues, and what does not. I did not answer immediately, and that silence was not hesitation but intention, because decisions that matter are not made to fill the air, they are made when the air has already changed. I could see it now, clearly, in the way Ashley's composure had thinned into something fragile, in the way Daniel no longer avoided my eyes but could not quite hold them either, caught somewhere between expectation and regret. For years I had been the one adjusting, the one softening the edges of uncomfortable moments, the one choosing peace over clarity, but standing there now I understood something that had taken me far too long to learn. Peace that requires silence is not peace. It is permission. There was a time, I said slowly, my voice calm but carrying through the room with quiet certainty, when I would have chosen the simple path without even thinking about it. I would have smiled, said it was nothing, told myself that family matters more than words. I paused, letting that version of myself exist for just a moment, not as weakness but as truth. But that version of me believed that respect was automatic, I continued, that it came with time, with effort, with love. I let my gaze move briefly to the photographs along the wall, the frozen moments of birthdays and holidays, reminders of years spent building something I thought was shared. It does not, I said, returning my attention to the table. Respect is a choice. And tonight, that choice was made very clearly. Ashley shifted again, her hands now resting flat against the table as if she needed the surface to steady herself. "Margaret, I think we can fix this," she said quickly, her voice controlled but urgent now, the first real crack in her certainty. "If something I said came across the wrong way, I can clarify. We can move past this." I watched her for a moment, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet recognition, because I had seen this before, not just in her but in others, in situations where consequences arrive faster than expected and the instinct was not reflection but repair. "Clarify," I repeated gently, not mocking, not sharp, just precise. "You called me something in front of a room full of people. There was no confusion in your words." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out right away, and for the first time that evening, her silence was not controlled. Daniel leaned forward then, his voice softer, almost pleading. "Mom, please," he said. "We can do better. I can do better. Just tell me what you want, and I will make it right." I turned to him fully then, meeting his eyes without hesitation, and for a brief moment, I saw the sincerity there, the part of him that still believed things could be corrected with effort alone. "What I want," I said quietly, "cannot be given after it is taken." The words were not harsh, but they were final in a way that effort could not undo. He sat back slightly, the weight of that settling over him in a way that did not need further explanation. Mr. Cole remained still beside me, his presence unchanged, but the folder in his hands now felt less like an object and more like a boundary, something that marked the difference between what had been assumed and what was now understood. "The trust was created to protect what matters," I continued, my voice steady. "Not just the money but the values behind it. The expectation that the people who benefit from it would also uphold something in return." I let that settle, not as a lecture but as a statement of fact. Ashley straightened slightly, drawing in a slow breath as if preparing to regain control of the conversation. "So you are saying you are going to take everything away?" she asked, her tone sharper now, the urgency no longer hidden behind politeness. I shook my head once slowly. "No," I said. "I am saying that access is not a right. It is a reflection." I took a small step forward, not to intimidate, but to close the distance that had existed for far too long. "And tonight," I added, my voice calm, almost gentle, "you showed me exactly what that reflection looks like." The room fell still again, but this time there was no confusion left in it, only understanding, quiet and undeniable, as the moment settled into something that could not be undone by explanation or softened by apology, because what had been revealed was not new, only finally seen for what it had always been. The room did not move after that, not even in the small ways people usually do when a conversation reaches its end. No shifting in chairs, no reaching for glasses, no quiet attempts to restore normalcy, because something had already crossed a line that could not be stepped back over, and everyone in that space could feel it whether they were ready to admit it or not. Ashley's expression changed again, not back to confidence, not even to composure, but to something more exposed, something that had run out of strategies and was left with only reaction. "You are overreacting," she said, but the words did not carry the same weight they once might have. They felt thinner now, stretched over something unstable. I did not respond to the accusation, because it was not one that required an answer. Instead, I turned slightly toward Mr. Cole, a small gesture that was enough to shift the room's attention once more. He understood immediately, opening the folder again with the same calm precision, turning to a final section that had not yet been read aloud. "As outlined in the final amendment," he said, his voice steady and clear, "any violation confirmed in a public setting may result in immediate and indefinite suspension of all current and future distributions, subject to the discretion of the grantor." The words were not louder than before, but they carried a finality that settled deeper than anything else he had said that evening. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound quiet but noticeable in the stillness. "Indefinite?" he asked, his voice low, as if saying the word too loudly might make it more real. Mr. Cole gave a small nod. "Yes," he replied. "Indefinite." Ashley pushed her chair back slightly, the legs making a soft sound against the floor, not dramatic, not abrupt, but enough to break the stillness in a way that drew every eye toward her. "This is not fair," she said, her voice rising just enough to lose its careful control. "You cannot just decide something like this over one comment, one moment. That is not how families work." I looked at her then, fully, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with a kind of clarity that had been missing for far too long. It was not one moment, I said quietly. It was the moment that revealed all the others. The words did not echo, but they did not need to. They settled exactly where they were meant to. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to dismiss the weight of it, but her movements were no longer confident, no longer certain. People say things, she insisted. Though her voice had begun to thin again. They do not mean them the way you are taking them. I let a brief silence pass before responding, not to create tension, but to ensure that what I said next was not lost in reaction. Meaning is not hidden in words, I said. It is revealed by them. Daniel pressed his lips together, his hands tightening briefly before relaxing again, a silent acknowledgement of something he could not argue with. The room had grown smaller now, not physically, but in the way that everything unnecessary had fallen away, leaving only what mattered, what could not be ignored or redirected. I took a slow breath, steady and deliberate, and then I spoke again, my tone unchanged, calm, measured, final. The trust is suspended, I said. There was no emphasis, no raised voice, no dramatic pause, just a statement delivered with the same quiet certainty that had carried every word before it. Mr. Cole inclined his head slightly, as if confirming what had already been decided. Ashley stared at me, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and realization, as if she was still searching for a way to shift the moment back into something she could control. You are making a mistake, she said, softer now, but no less urgent. I did not respond to the claim. I did not defend the decision. I simply met her gaze and held it, because some things do not require explanation once they are clear. Daniel looked at me again, his expression heavier now, not just with confusion, but with understanding, the kind that arrives too late to change what has already been set in motion. Mom, he said quietly, is there anything I can do? I considered the question for a moment, not because I did not know the answer, but because I wanted him to understand it fully when it came. Yes, I said finally. You can remember this moment. He frowned slightly as if expecting more, as if waiting for something actionable, something immediate. I did not give it to him. Because this, I added, my voice steady, is where everything changed. And as the words settled into the room, there was no movement to contradict them, no voice to challenge them, only a quiet, undeniable recognition that what had just been decided was not temporary, not negotiable, but something that would remain long after the table was cleared and the room returned to silence. No one tried to stop me when I reached for my purse, and that, more than anything else, told me the moment had settled into something final, something that no one in that room quite knew how to undo. The air felt different now, not tense in the way it had been before, but quieter, as if the space itself had accepted a shift that could not be argued with. I took my time not out of hesitation, but because I no longer felt the need to move for anyone else's comfort. For years I had been the one adjusting my pace, my words, my presence, making myself smaller so that others could feel larger. Standing there now, I understood how unnecessary that had been. Mr. Cole stepped slightly to the side, giving me space without a word, his role complete, his presence still steady but no longer central. I gave him a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement, and he returned it just as simply. Around the table no one spoke. Ashley remained seated, her posture rigid, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and calculation, as if she was still searching for a version of this evening that ended differently. Daniel had not moved either, his hands resting on the table, his gaze lowered, not in avoidance this time, but in thought, the kind that arrives when something cannot be explained away. I paused briefly, letting my eyes move across the room one last time. Not searching for approval, not expecting apology, just observing. The polished table, the carefully arranged settings, the untouched glasses, all of it still in place, unchanged in appearance but entirely different in meaning. I will have my office send over the formal notice in the morning, Mr. Cole said quietly, his voice measured, respectful, as if speaking into the silence rather than breaking it. I inclined my head slightly in response, then turned toward the doorway. My steps were unhurried, steady, each one deliberate, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I finally understood that leaving did not mean losing. It meant choosing. Behind me, I heard Daniel's chair shift, the faint sound of movement that suggested he might stand, might say something, might try to reach for a version of me that had already stepped beyond where he expected me to remain. "Mom," he said, his voice low, uncertain, carrying just enough to reach me before I crossed the threshold. I stopped, but I did not turn immediately. I let the word settle, not as a command, not as a plea, just as something that still existed between us even now. When I did turn, it was slow, composed, my expression calm, my gaze steady. "Yes," I asked, not sharply, not warmly, just clearly. He hesitated, the space between his intention and his words stretching just long enough to reveal that he did not have the answer he thought he would. "I did not see it," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "I should have, but I did not." I held his gaze for a moment, not dismissing the admission, but not softening it either. "Seeing is a choice," I replied gently, "just like everything else." The words were not meant to wound. They were not meant to comfort. They were simply true. He nodded slowly, as if understanding that there was nothing more to add, nothing that could change what had already been set in motion. Ashley said nothing. Not this time. Her silence was no longer strategic. It was simply there, unavoidable, the absence of something she no longer knew how to control. I turned back toward the doorway, stepping into the hallway where the light was softer, quieter, removed from the sharp clarity of the dining room. The sound of my heels against the floor was the only thing that followed me, steady, unbroken, marking each step as something chosen rather than imposed. When I reached the front door, I paused for just a moment, my hand resting lightly on the handle, not out of doubt but out of recognition. Not of the house, not of the people behind me, but of myself. The woman who had walked into that room had been willing to accept less than she deserved, because she believed it was easier than asking for more. The woman standing there now understood something different. That silence is not strength when it protects the wrong things. That patience is not virtue when it allows disrespect to grow. And that walking away is not the end of something. It is the beginning of knowing exactly what you will no longer accept. I opened the door and stepped outside into the cool evening air, the quiet of the street settling around me in a way that felt steady, not empty. Behind me, the house remained exactly as it had been, but I did not look back. I did not need to, because what I left behind was not mine anymore, and what I carried forward did not need to be explained to anyone who had not chosen to see it when it was right in front of them. I walked to my car, placed my purse on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment before starting the engine, my hands resting lightly on the wheel. There was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet certainty that had not been there before. I had not raised my voice. I had not argued. I had not demanded anything. And yet everything had changed. I was never powerless. I was never unaware. I was simply waiting for the moment when silence would no longer serve me. And when that moment came, I did not need to fight for respect. I simply stopped accepting anything less.